You are listening to another episode, a very special episode of the Case Closed podcast. Here's part two of our conversation with Joe Murray.
Wow. So that's a lot of stuff I really just didn't know in regards to how you guys had to record stuff back then. So you probably were working on multiple series at one time, probably recording so many things even in the same day is what it sounds like. You would record multiple shows in a day from the sounds of what you're telling me.
I don't know if we did, if there was some, you raise a good question, Frank. I don't know if we did overlapping series like Conan and One Piece. I know that One Piece came very quickly, right on the heels of Conan.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether we had the bandwidth to be able to do them both, both from scripting and just even studio time. And there was a different cast. There was a much larger cast on One Piece. A lot of the same principles, Chuck, myself, Brian, and I think Paul Pastore came in kind of in the middle of that. But there were a lot of chicks too. There were some female actresses that were brought in to do One Piece. So there were some budgets there to bring in talent, but the problem is they paid a lot for some of the talent, and then they didn't have that much for some of the other aspects of production. So eventually money got tight all around. But on Conan, yes, you're right. We would do 3 or 4 episodes over a period of days. We just had, I can't remember whether we had 26 or 52 episodes to do for Conan. I'd have to
I
dig
think
into
on your website it says 52. But
Really? Okay.
yeah, but
All right.
then again, you've got the DVDs, so if you've only got 26, that might be all they did. So
Well, no, I don't really have them all in succession. What I was doing was pinching the QC copies,
oh, okay.
right? So they would, they they kind of left it up to us they distributed out the QCing. You know what I mean by QCing, right? Quality control
Yeah.
review. So I said, no, make me copies and I'll look at it at home and I'll give you my comments, right? And then I would squirrel away the copies because I'm a bit of a pack rat anyway. And if I'm not wrong, I'm probably the only guy that has anything on Detective Conan, although it has time codes. It's not the final version. That's the problem.
Right.
So you'd have to do some, if anybody wanted to go that route, you'd have to do a little bit of video editing to get the time codes and stuff out. But I do have, I think, the first 6 episodes on DVD.
Wow.
That I know.
Okay.
And
Well,
I offer. It's funny because I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I did offer that up to some guy that was trying to set up a website devoted to the Singapore dub of Detective Conan, and he found me when I was still out in Asia. He found me in Singapore years later, maybe it was about 5 years ago, and he was like all full of enthusiasm to try and get this site up, and he said, "Oh my God, you actually have." I don't know whether I sent it to him or whether I promised to send it to him, and I never heard from him. I forget, but I don't know whatever happened to that. I think it was a Brit. He was a British guy.
well, he could have been doing what I was trying to do and maybe bring attention to an English dub version, and that was his favorite dub.
Could be.
It could be, and that for me when I started, we focused a lot on the Funimation dub and kind of the business side of things, and and I think that's the important part to remember is you have shows that you love and you're passionate about, but you got to understand at the end of the day it's a business,
Yeah,
and that
very true.
there's a bunch of aspects that you need to cover in that. You have to tell that story to a degree because in the US it didn't sell enough or it just didn't have the interest, or I kind of like the idea of going a little deeper into that and getting the full story and
Sure.
kind of putting out what I think happened, which I think it was released at an awkward time in the States, at least, where you're between the TV deal didn't pan out because the ratings weren't what Adult Swim wanted them to be because it
Mm.
aired on Adult Swim. I think going from 3 episodes on one DVD to 25 episodes in a short span, people had to double dip to get that, and I think it's becoming even more expensive to purchase. And
Yeah.
I think people wanted to double dip more often than not. There's just so many, other things. In Singapore, it's very interesting that because what it sounds like you're telling me is that they had these episodes in mind to record, but what's interesting is that they didn't. It doesn't sound like they wanted to acquire more episodes to record after that initial either 26 or 52 to
Yeah.
continue on, which I think is interesting because in Singapore, it sounds like there was a couple of TV deals at least behind it, even though the channel folded, that one channel folded, it
Right.
went to another cable network. So with a solid TV deal behind it, I'm surprised they didn't produce more episodes.
Well, that's a good observation. And, I got quite a few thoughts on the whole idea of how the reason why Detective Conan was historically important, if you will, in terms of Japanese anime coming to the English-speaking world as English dubs is because Japanese initially didn't want to do it. They were sitting on a treasure trove of creative content that they never thought had an external market. And so from what I understood, and it's too bad I wasn't involved on the business side of this because I was preoccupied with my own corporate career at the time, but I would have been fascinated to understand how it worked to convince the Japanese that, hey, there is this big global market for this stuff. You guys really should start releasing this. So I think in many ways what was done in Singapore was a bit of an experiment, and they wanted to test the theory of whether this stuff actually could travel outside of Japan.
Yeah.
And the circumstances on the ground are a bit screwy because the Singapore market's very small. Singapore only has about, at that time, 4 million people with limited viewing. Not everybody is an English speaker. So, your television, I have no idea what the demographics were in terms of viewing audience for Conan or any of the anime that was released. But I do know that with Conan, somebody took the decision not to put it on to VCD, whereas with One Piece they did. So there must not have been, the market draw, the market pull on Detective Conan after the first 56 to 52 episodes to justify further investment in that property. This is just my supposition. I have no real hard evidence one way or the other, but it's kind of logical to assume that, given that it never made it to VCD distribution, whereas One Piece did. And for my money, I actually thought some of the writing in the mid episodes of Conan was stronger than some of the silly shit that was going on in One Piece, because I was involved in both productions. So just seeing the episodes front to back in the QC process, I thought some of the One Piece episodes got pretty goofy, whereas the Conan ones were starting to get a little bit risque. I remember one or two episodes that were like, I said, whoa, that's Conan's in a bathtub and Nami, what's her name? Nami? Was that the chick's name?
With Rachel or Ron. Yeah.
Ron. Yeah. Was that the girl's name?
Yeah,
Ron?
in Japanese, yeah.
Yeah. And she was actually rubbing him down in the bathtub, well, you would know it because you would have seen it in the Funimation, unless they edited it. I don't know. They could have.
No, they didn't really edit that stuff out.
Okay.
And that was more into season 2, so like around
Right.
the late 20s or 30s episode mark, they were doing that.
Correct. Yeah. And I thought that had a little more, for me, I thought it had a little more appeal, and something because there were murder mysteries, right? So it was a whodunit kind of a thing. Whereas One Piece, I thought some of the storylines got a bit meandering and silly for my money,
Sure, and I've never, for me, I've heard so many things about One Piece, and I just haven't really gotten into it. And for me, Detective Conan's really interesting because I don't watch a ton of anime. I watch what most people watch over here in the States growing up is, like Dragon Ball Z, Inuyasha, Yu Yu Hakusho, Yu-Gi-Oh! But that stuff a lot of kids just grew up on watching on TV. And so, but when I saw it, for the first time I had seen it, on Adult Swim, there's something different about it that I don't see in other shows. It's not just my favorite anime show, it's my favorite TV show because I think it's just very interesting, and it's now it's 900 episodes plus in, and
that's
there's
amazing.
all these
that
different
really is
story
amazing.
arcs and characters, and but to me it's still fascinating, and it's and I did want to touch on something else, Joe. You said something about the one of the movies being based in Singapore. The most recent film, Fist of the Blue Sapphire, that came out, the storyline was based in Singapore.
Okay, that was the one I was thinking of. Yeah, like I said, I just saw it in passing. I didn't see the film, but I saw a promotion for it. and I did see that it was actually not premiered, but it was shown in Singapore recently. And I was quite intrigued, of course, because I said, wow, the franchise is still going. They're still producing new iterations of Conan in long form, which I thought was pretty cool.
It's insane. The 23rd movie this past year, I believe the recent Avengers movie and that movie came out in Japan at the same time, and Conan outsold
Oh,
Avengers in
yeah.
Japan. So it's
Well,
crazy.
on that point, and you would know this better than me, but one thing I do remember was when we were doing Conan, anybody who knew anything about anime knew that this was one of the more celebrated Japanese anime series around. It was like, oh, Detective Conan. Um, that's very popular in Japan. It's hugely popular. So I think TMS went with Conan first because I don't know what other properties they had, but I thought they had Yu-Gi-Oh! They might have had Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't know. But we did Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. Now, I wasn't involved in that. That preceded Conan. So I think they started with Yu-Gi-Oh! For that for that Channel 8 MediaWorks TV channel. And then they went to Conan, and I think Conan came second because it was pricier, because they thought it to be a more valuable property because of its popularity in Japan.
Yeah, and it's that matches with what Funimation told me initially with the licensing costs, and I really learned a lot from them as far as it's not just about licensing the show, it's the music, it's
Absolutely.
um, copyrights on the artist, sound effects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A DVD deal is not the same as streaming or selling it via streaming as a physical DVD sale. You have
Yeah.
distributor licenses, you have movie licenses are even separate and
Yep.
they're individual. So it's a whole thing, and I was fascinated just hearing about that. And in Singapore, that's what makes the dub you worked on, I think, so interesting to me is that a lot of that was like laying the groundwork for what ended up coming to the U.S. in a lot of ways, whether Funimation was aware of it or not. I think that there's some evidence. I think in just hearing a couple of small voice clips that you do, I think there's some influence, like just the certain way Shinichi says something. Now Jerry Jewell naturally sounds like that character, but I think in line delivery there has to be some influence there somewhere. And I find it hard to believe that in the States that a company like Funimation wouldn't be aware that there was another English dub at some point, because
Mm.
if you guys had worked on it, in 2003, and all of that mostly came out in 2003, from what you've said,
Yeah.
their dub didn't air on Adult Swim until May of 2004.
Right.
Even though they acquired the license in 2003, it didn't make it to our airwaves until then. And so
Well, they
it's
must have needed at least a year to produce it, right? To do the dubbing production and the translate, because they would have had different scripts. But it's a fascinating question, and I think one worth pursuing if you are in touch with Funimation people that would go back that far. Did they in fact get from TMS everything that we did in Singapore, including the scripts? Be interesting to know. Or basically, were they given a whole carte blanche to start from scratch and do it all over again? I would think that some of the scripts might have actually been passed over to them, because if the Japanese are very frugal, and if they already paid for one set of translation, why would they redo it just because it's a different recipient, right? Good questions. I honestly don't know the answer because, like I said, we were in the throes of it, and the genesis of it was not something that I knew of at the time, but only came to learn through hearsay and through retrospect.
Well, and it'd be worth seeing some of the early episodes that you guys did, just to kind of watch your dub and compare it with the Funimation dub and see if the scripts line up.
Sure,
I would
by all
love to
means.
see that.
Well, if you'd like, I can make you a copy of the DVD and then get that off to you. You're up in Arlington. Looks like we're freaking neighbors. That's kind of strange, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm actually not too far from Arlington. Actually, I'm out. I'm in Dallas, but I'm in Mesquite, Texas. So a lot
Oh,
of
you're
people
in
are from
Mesquite?
Mesquite.
Okay.
So, but I can see Dallas from my house.
Yeah.
It's right up the road.
Right.
I would love a copy of it, honestly, just to view what you guys did. And I know I'm sure it'll have the time codes on there and everything. But if it plays, I'd absolutely love to see what you guys did
Sure.
with that
Sure.
early content. Just because I think, this stuff fascinates me. I don't, a lot of people may not find it interesting, and I could be in the minority of it, but I love this kind of stuff. I love the history of it. I think
Yeah.
that how these dubs come about and are produced it's a story worth telling, and I think it's also the genesis of the business, here in the States. Now, obviously, there were other animes that came before Conan in the U.S., like, Dragon Ball and Gundam and,
Yeah.
stuff that aired on Toonami over here. Um, but the genesis of it is just fascinating to me, and I just love talking about it and hearing about it. And some of the choices, I think, too, in the Singapore dub, um, initially, all I've seen is the opening and closing sequences.
Mm-hmm.
But in the closing sequence, I noticed they just use an instrumental version of that song,
Right.
whereas Funimation tried to they dubbed a song over it, and I like the instrumental version that
It
Singapore
rocks,
did.
man. It's pretty heavy, not heavy metal, but I mean, it really has a lot of loud guitar and some pretty heavy drumming, and sort of surprised me that that the Japanese would have associated that with that show, but it works. It works.
Want to say thanks to everybody for tuning in and listening to part 2. Check out the third and final part of our interview with Joe Murray. It'll be dropping a week from today. Also, really, really big thanks to Joe for joining us on the podcast and talking to us as long as he did, and for sending over the episodes that he had so we could go ahead and get those converted and restored. If you haven't checked those out yet, you can check them out on our Facebook page. We've got links to them in all sorts of places. And so definitely check them out and let us know what you think.